Welcome to Psyche Magic, a podcast about self-discovery and the subconscious, where we explore the symbolic language of dreams, tarot, and archetypes. I'm your host, Jordan Hale. I'm a psychotherapist based in Nashville, Tennessee. Each episode, I'll hold a casual conversation with various artists and healers about their shadow work practices. We pull tarot cards, unpack a significant dream or dream theme, and discuss their personal healing arts practices. So please grab a cup of something delicious and stay a while. While aspects of this podcast may feel therapeutic, it is never meant to take the place of therapy. Welcome back to Psyche Magic. The first whiff of fall is finally in the air, and let me tell you, this is my season to thrive. I am claiming it. My summer has been a blur as I've stepped through the psychedelic portal of motherhood, with my daughter Iris Julia Higbee arriving Earthside on July 12th. To say that she has rocked my world is an understatement, and she's already holding up a mirror to my truth, my most raw and powerful form of love, and my shadow in ways I could never have imagined. She was born so small, just over 5 pounds, but after a brief NICU stay and some intense weeks of around-the-clock feeding, she is hitting all of her milestones. We are so incredibly grateful for this healthy, beautiful girl, and I cannot wait to get to know her better. Her name came to me in a dream one night, out of the blue, and was nowhere near being on our radar of my long-standing notes app with favorite baby names. Last year, after a devastating pregnancy loss, my husband Daniel and I took a trip to Ireland as an attempt to facilitate adventure and vibrancy amidst our profound grief. There we conceived our daughter, and throughout the trip we saw rainbows everywhere. Not only did we see several in the sky, which is rare enough, but there was also a neon rainbow light exhibit up outside of our favorite hotel in Belfast. A baby born after a loss is known colloquially as a rainbow baby. And, as it turns out, Iris was also the name of the Greek goddess of the rainbow. So our magical girl has been steeped in synchronicity since the beginning, and it has only continued from there. If you'd like more frequent updates and a window into more of my personal world, I'm writing about all of this regularly on our Substack. There we have an entire archive of the podcast, bonus minisodes, and my personal essays where I write about nature-based spirituality and sources of creative inspiration with both free and paid subscriber options. So if you want to keep up with all we have going on during this wild time, be sure to follow along with us there if you haven't already. That link is psychemagic.substack.com. My Substack is, at its core, an altar to my creative practices, the embers I hope to keep fanning throughout the harrowing early motherhood journey, and I write often there about the small but significant ways I am incorporating creativity into my daily life. My guest today, Dr. Sarah Bollinger, a friend and fellow therapist, is someone I look up to for the ways in which she has consistently built a vibrant and wildly successful life around her creative endeavors. She's not only a seasoned psychotherapist specializing in internal family systems therapy, but she's also an incredibly skillful potter and has cultivated her side hustle, Slow Life Pottery, into a thriving business. Her work is earthy and sensual, and speaking of rainbows, delightfully kaleidoscopic. All characteristics I could ascribe to her as a human being as well. I hope you enjoy our conversation as much as I did. All right. Dr. Sarah Bollinger, welcome to Psyche
Hello.
Magic at long last. Hello, gorgeous.
I'm so thrilled to be here.
Me too. Sarah is
Yay.
a dear, 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 dear friend for listeners, and we have been talking about doing this forever, and now we're finally doing it. And I'm so excited.
Yes, we have.
Okay, Sarah, please just briefly introduce yourself for the listeners. Just tell them a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Sarah Bollinger. I'm a psychotherapist in private practice, which is so lovely. And my license is in clinical social work. So I'm an LCSW, and I also have a PhD in clinical social work as well. And I just love looking at the work of psychotherapy through the lens of social work. And I'm a very, very proud social worker. So I like to say that out loud. And then in addition to that, I consider myself an artist and
Yes.
musician, a partner, a doggy mom, a sister, a daughter, all the
Love.
things.
I
So
love that you include all of those things because all of those things are what life is all about.
yes, exactly.
Well, and part of the reason that I wanted to have you on the show, Sarah, is that I love having someone who has both this, expertise in mental health and in this field that we, my listeners are all really interested in, but also someone who makes creativity a priority in their life and has really
Yeah.
walked the walk from where I sit in a way
Mhm.
that's very inspiring to me. So I'm just very happy that you're here and I'm excited to let listeners get to know you.
Yeah, thanks for saying that.
Yay.
It's cool to have that reflected back to me because it is such a huge part of my personal and also professional identity is this
Of
creativity
course.
that I try to weave into that practice. So, yeah.
Of course. I really quick before we get started, actually, you mentioned just the importance of the actual title of social worker. And I wonder
Hmm.
if just briefly for listeners who may not be familiar, if you could just share a little bit about what that specifically means, how that maybe differentiates you in terms of the way that you practice.
Yeah, so I think that's a great question. For anybody who is involved in the psychotherapy world, there are a number of pathways to get
Yes.
to that spot in your career.
The alphabet soup that comes at the end of your name, right?
Exactly, a
L
million
C
letters to be
M
said.
F L T. Yeah.
MP, yeah,
Yeah.
all the things. And the route that I took was, as I said, through the social work lens, and through I have my master's in social work and my PhD in clinical social work, as I mentioned. And I can't speak for the other professions
No.
because I haven't taken that route. So who's to say exactly what the differences were? But for me, when I chose social work, I chose it because of the emphasis on social justice and sort of seeing things from a larger systemic lens,
Yeah.
that the individual isn't just their own psyche that in sort of a box or something, right? But
Hmm.
like I think social work really sort of builds that into a whole theory and talks about psychology and mental health in the context of our micro, meso, and macro systems,
There it
and
is.
really
Yes.
speaks to like um, yeah, the politics of it, the justice of it, how these isms, racism,
Yeah.
sexism, ableism, all of these things impact our mental health and well-being, our
Yeah.
relationships. And so when I come into a room with a client, I'm bringing all of that, sort of context and narrative with
Hmm.
me. And I encourage my clients to bring that context and narrative with them so that we can look at this from a larger lens. And I love that that is the emphasis that social
Yes.
work takes as a
Yes.
profession. So,
Sarah, that is
um,
what a beautiful explanation. That's so helpful to
mm,
hear. Even for
yeah,
me, as
thanks.
someone who's actually really familiar with these different licenses and frameworks and dynamics, just to hear you boil it
Yeah.
down that way is really
Mm,
helpful. And yeah, that really moves me because there is so much to be said for I don't know. My observation of the field of mental health is that sometimes there's this overemphasis on the individual and personal behavioral choices. And if
yeah.
you just did X instead of Y, you would be feeling better, right? And it
Yeah.
puts all of this pressure and emphasis on the person and the individual when zooming out in these ways that you described is often the thing that can really start to move the needle. right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly. Yeah, the way that something like, and no shade here, but an intervention like CBT, cognitive
sure.
behavioral therapy,
Good
says, oh, if
example. Yeah.
you change this cognition, then you won't have this bad behavior anymore. And let's just work here. But I mean, somebody who, whatever, grew up in poverty or is in an abusive relationship or never had access to education or is underemployed or, any of these things, is a person of color, is a woman, right? Like
Hmm.
changing cognitions doesn't then actually help much if
Right.
the environment is still the same. So in social work, we say, okay, like, let's look at all these factors. Yeah, cognitions might play into that. We'll look at behavior change, but also how do we impact this larger social system that you're a part of, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
So, yeah.
Absolutely. Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you for sharing
Yeah,
that. And I'm sure that will play into the broader conversation that we end up having. But just nice to
for
lay a
sure.
little groundwork, right?
Exactly.
Okay. So now shifting gears, let's pull our tarot card. Okay.
Love this.
Sarah, I always like to ask guests like where they are with tarot or if they have any experience with tarot. And I know a little bit about this for you, but if you want to share anything about just kind of whether you're interested in tarot, whether it's something you've practiced, I know listeners will be
Yeah.
curious. While I
Yeah.
shuffle.
Oh, great. Perfect. I would say I am tarot curious.
Nice. Love that.
We may or may not get into this, but I grew up in a very conservative, religious, what I would now classify as a cult, although I may not have, I definitely wouldn't have when I was growing up.
Knowing what we know now. Yeah.
Extremely fundamental. Yeah. And have found my way out of that and have found freedom from that. And then with that said, I also feel like I'm a deeply spiritual person, right? So I've
Yes.
left formal religion, but I'm always really interested in ways that I can practice and tap into spirituality. And I'm just new to it. So I'm just kind of like, let me learn more. I'm open here. So yeah, I know just very, very basics, and I'm excited to learn more about the tarot.
Yes. I love that, Sarah. Tarot Curious is just such a fun place to be,
Mhm.
especially because for me, tarot is just nothing but a tool for exploration and play. And
Right.
in so many ways, especially if we're not ascribing like a set meaning to each card, it really is the antithesis of what you're speaking about, which is this upbringing in which there's always one distinct answer, right? That's the
Yes.
correct
One right
answer.
way. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Now, I pulled our card. It's a very interesting card. I'm going to show it to you and I'm going to just describe it to the listeners. So, this is the Four of Pentacles that we have pulled. And this card depicts a
Mm.
person who is seated. He is holding this pentacle, this disc in his arms. He also has a pentacle or disc above his head and two placed below each of his feet. In the background, there's this sort of cityscape. And so we get this idea that he is set apart from his environment in this moment, in this depiction. So yeah, Four of Pentacles. I like to do just quick, like gut check, hot take, like what comes up for you when you look at this card.
Yeah. I don't know anything about this card, on my own,
Right.
but the
Right.
gut take.
Yeah.
Yeah. When I look at this card, I think about sort of mind, the pentacle above
Yeah.
his head, mind, spirit or heart, emotion, the pentacle kind of around his like chest and heart, and then body, sort of the feet being grounded, sort of like his posture of being sitting in the chair.
Yeah.
Yeah, it just sort of seems like a holistic card, right? Where your mind, your heart, and your body are kind of held together. And
Yes.
I like that. Yeah.
But there's a pleasing sense for you to that sort of like
Yeah.
balance that's occurring. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Well, the other thing I forgot to mention for listeners is that he also has a crown on his head, which is just another interesting symbol. He has a
Mhm.
crown and he has this sort of red kind of robe cape that he's wearing. But yes, so I do read this card, Sarah, as a card that is about a striving or a process around balance, specifically pentacles are reference to sort of the material, physical world
Mm,
and our material and physical needs. So when we're thinking about creating balance in those areas, we're thinking about things that I need in order to both survive and also feel regulated in my
yeah.
body, in my nervous system. So we're thinking about what are the ways in which I can interact with the material world, right? That allow me to create and find that balance for
Yeah.
myself. Yeah.
Cool.
Um so yeah, I don't know if that resonates for you, but I
Absolutely.
definitely resonates for me.
Yeah, in a lot of ways, I
I
bet.
know. As a new
Yeah.
mom, I'm like, "Oh my God, help me."
Well, and it's very, I mean, you're dealing with all of the very sort of material, physical things, right? I
Right?
mean,
Bodily
yeah,
functions. Like
basic, yeah, back to the basics, right?
it is so back to the basics.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
Okay, so yeah, this is a really interesting card. I like it a lot.
Hmm.
I get the sense that I don't know. I don't know. Obviously, there's no distinct meaning here that is more relevant or correct than any other, but for me, the crown is interesting simply because I view this person as sort of someone who has been maybe I don't know, elevated in some way, celebrated in
Hmm.
some way. Maybe he's achieved a lot, right?
Yeah.
And yet he's coming back to this sort of ongoing balancing act. Like he may be an expert in a lot of ways in his life, but there's always this returning to this
Hmm.
process for him. Um, so I just think that's
Yeah,
another interesting like
that's really
layer.
beautiful too. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, I love
yeah.
that.
Okay, I'm gonna set him up here. I like to kind of prop the card up and just like look at it while we talk and see if any more little messages come through. You never know.
Yeah, can join us for the
Four of
conversation.
Pentacles can just hang out with us. Yeah,
That's
exactly.
right.
Okay, so we've got our card. Let's do our dream discussion. So, Sarah, did you bring a dream of your own? Did you bring a client dream? What kind of direction did you decide to take this?
Yeah, I brought a dream of my own,
Nice.
and it's an interesting one because it's not super plot heavy. Like there
Okay.
wasn't a lot happening.
Yeah.
I think I'd say this event and that event and this thing and this thing, but it was more atmospheric, right?
Yeah.
Sort of this just vibe that
I
I
know what you
had
mean. Hmm.
in the dream. So I was in a parade.
Oh,
And
cool.
I had like a little streamer banner
Yeah.
thing, and there was a whole crowd with me. And I think I knew some of the people, but the only like face that I can actually like pinpoint now is the spouse of an old friend of mine that I haven't
Interesting.
really been in touch with, just random.
Yeah.
And that was it. Like we were in this
Yeah.
parade and we were marching and everybody and like laughing and kind of dancing and like
Yeah.
throwing these like very bizarre like streamer things around. And there was this bubbling atmosphere of joy, like
Mm,
almost a little bit of like, is this gonna boil over into something like
yeah.
crazy, like unfettered? And
Interesting.
and that was it. And we just
Yeah.
marched. We were just sort
Yeah.
of like marching, dancing. So yeah, it was just
Okay.
very interesting. I
No,
was just
no.
gonna say it was striking because of that vibe, because of that feeling.
The
Um,
feeling.
yeah.
The
So
feeling of this is so wonderful and exciting and celebratory, and also we're verging on a little bit of like maybe a feeling of are we going to lose control in some way?
yeah, like
Or
chaotic madness
yeah.
in some ways. It was almost
Yes.
this like revelry sort of
Oh, that's
thing.
so
It
interesting.
was
Yeah, just right
interesting.
on the
Yeah.
like right on the line of that
Yeah.
feeling. Yeah.
Yeah. Not quite fearful,
Uh-huh.
but a little bit like, where is this gonna go? Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
wow. Okay, okay. A couple of just potentially interesting questions. Who knows if they'll actually lead anywhere, but I'm curious about the context of the dream. So, when you had this dream and what was sort of going on in your life at that time, if that feels useful to share.
Yeah. There's no like, there's nothing like majorly shifting in my life
Yeah.
But I've been exploring this concept of joy just
Okay.
internally. And actually, I was reading this book called Inciting Joy by Ross Gay, and I
Okay. Oh,
highly recommend it to
I love
you listeners
Roske.
out there. So amazing. And I've been listening to the audiobook
Nice.
version because he reads it, and it's just so magical. And I've just been really like kind of meditating on and re-listening to, it's a series of essays. The book is a series of essays,
Right.
and I've just been like diving into each one and re-listening to it. And he does this brilliant unpacking of joy in a way that avoids being trite, right? Because I think
Mm,
we can talk about joy as sort of this like, and then I just felt good and like rip the like meaning and depth from it.
sure.
But he talks about joy as being completely like married to, inseparable from suffering
Wow.
and sorrow. And he opens the book by talking about how he was having this party where he's, metaphorically inviting everyone and they're bringing their sorrows, and
Mm,
everybody's, sort of inviting all of these pains, and they're bringing dishes. And before you know it, their sorrows are dancing together and tussling out in the yard and maybe
wow.
cooking a casserole together. And he just does this beautiful thing where all of a sudden you realize, like, oh gosh, like the depth of human emotion has to be fully realized. You can't live
Mm,
in this numb middle. It's like
mm,
really both, or it's not any of it at all, right? There's no
damn.
numbing. And so I've been really mulling over that, and, everything, not to make this political again, but everything that's
But
happening
maybe
in
a
the
little.
political
Yeah.
stage right now has given me just immense hope and joy, like in a way that I haven't experienced before. And we don't know what's going to happen, but
Sure.
I've been relishing in that. It's been really great.
But
So
we are in a very hopeful moment, right?
yeah,
For those of us who are hoping for some progressive change. Yeah.
right.
We'll say it that way for now.
Yeah.
Okay, yes. So the, sort of duality, multiplicity of the joy and the sorrow, and just pontificating on that. And I love that you brought that up because that's exactly, kind of the conversation we were having off mic before we started, which is like the feeling that I've been tapping into of this sort
Yes.
of early motherhood dance of like the lows are so low and so hard, and the
Yes.
highs are just the highest I've ever experienced, right? So then
Mhm.
we're just dancing in between both of those places so often.
Yeah.
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 And it's a lot.
Exactly.
It's a lot.
It's a lot.
Yeah, that's beautiful, Sarah. And in
Mhm.
this celebration and this celebratory context, there's this feeling that the dream sort of points you to, which is you help me if this feels right, but to me, it evokes that little pit in my stomach that I get sometimes as someone else who survived like a high control, high demand religion, which is that like you're never supposed to feel too good. And if you
Right.
do, you're doing something wrong, or you're being selfish, or you're not participating in life the way that you're supposed to be. You're not being high minded enough, whatever it is. But there's this little like, when's the other shoe gonna drop feeling
Right.
that can happen.
Exactly.
And or like, is this okay to feel this way right
Mhm.
now? So I don't know. That's just what that brings up for me.
I really resonate with that, right? It's like anytime I feel good
Hmm.
or in my body or
Yes.
feral a little bit,
Sure.
right?
Good
Like just
word.
like a bit unhinged, but not in not in a bad way, but just sort of like just off the beaten track a little bit.
Yeah.
I'm always like, this can't be right. I got to bring it back into
Yeah.
this, very contained sort of white knuckled way of living
Hmm.
where it's controlled. I know what to expect. And I think that was ground into me from these very, extreme religious beliefs.
Hmm.
And so when, therefore, I start to feel joy in my life, I often am like, okay, rein it in. Like,
Yeah.
don't feel
Rein
too
it in.
much,
Yeah.
don't go overboard here.
Mhm.
But I think what was really thrilling about this dream, it was like, I don't know. What if we went overboard? What if we lusted a
Yeah.
little bit, you
What if we
know?
went a little
Like,
feral, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
I don't
I
know.
love that. I love that too
Yeah.
because it reminds me of a sort of, archetypal idea that you and I have talked about a good bit, which is sort of this like divine feminine kind of wild woman archetype, right? Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Exactly.
In so many ways, the sort of, again, like to use this word, antithesis of like what we both grew up in, the sort of over controlled environment, the patriarchal environment. So the wild woman is there beckoning.
100%. And I think that really speaks to my phase of life, right? Like
Uh-huh.
I am a happily child-free person
Yes.
who
Yes.
is also entering, yeah, I guess middle age, maybe like pre-crone, right? Like
Pre-crone, love that.
era, peri-crone era.
Pre-crone.
Um, and it's actually so amazing,
Mm,
right? Like, I think we get all of these messages from our culture, from our religion, certainly,
mm.
advertisements, all the things about all of the ways that women need to be reined in, right?
Yes.
You need to be a certain body weight. You need to wear a certain makeup and have a certain
Hmm.
skin regime. Oh my God, if
Hmm.
you have wrinkles,
Hmm.
get thee to the Botox center, right? And get injections in your face. And
Yeah, you should be like a little girl, right? Yeah.
you should look like a child. Also, be quiet, be
Hmm.
nice, smile, right? I mean, all of these
Oh
things
yeah.
that we're told, all of the ways that we rein ourselves in. And in this chapter of life, both like having my body be my own,
Yeah.
i.e., bless you. No shade with for mothers, but like
No, this is so important. Yes, Sarah.
for my journey, it's so amazing to be like, my body is my own, and I might just go totally wild. You know what I
Yes,
mean? I
because
don't
I
have to appeal
can.
to the male gaze. I don't have to, worry about, you know, breastfeeding and birthing and, all of the
Yes.
things. Like, I am my own woman, maybe for the
Beautiful.
first time ever.
What a gift. Yes.
That's
Like,
freaking radical. Yeah.
yeah, of
Yeah.
course it is. Of course it is.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
there are ways that I think you can feel that way in motherhood. It's just speaking to my own journey of this. So,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely. No, I think it's so important to outline the ways that if any of us have found ways to reclaim our own autonomy in our body, we need to be
Yes.
talking about it. Like,
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Yeah. And I've just really been feeling that in this
it's
chapter of life.
beautiful. That's so
So,
beautiful.
yeah.
Okay, I had another question about your dream that I didn't want to forget to ask you, which is
Yeah.
I was curious about the sort of, just in as much detail as you want to, the associations that you have about the person whose face that you recognized, like qualities of this person, sort of like what this person might like symbolize.
Yeah, it's so interesting. Like I said, it's the spouse of an old friend who
Yeah.
we're not really in touch much.
Yeah.
And we kind of had a break in our friendship, although I think we repaired and the friend,
Yeah.
not the spouse, but the
Yeah.
friend, we have repaired over the years. And, we're just not as close as we used to be.
Yeah.
And they, I mean, without saying too much, they're going through
Sure.
something really difficult personally in their family
Interesting.
that
Yeah.
I found
Okay.
out about a couple of weeks ago, probably.
Okay. Yeah.
So, a recent event that has been really hard for them.
Yeah.
And I mean, that aspect is very interesting to me, that
I
aspect of the
agree.
dream, right?
Yeah. Well,
Um,
based on what you were saying about holding this sort of like duality of like the difficulty and the joy, and yeah, just a
exactly.
representation of that, perhaps. Yeah.
Yeah. Because I think that was so true for this person in the dream is it wasn't like this sorrowful event hadn't happened to them or they were
Yeah.
out of the context of their life. Like that was part of the story when I saw
Yeah.
them in the dream,
Yeah.
but they were participating just as fully
There you
in
go.
this parade, sort of dance thing that we were all
Getting a little
doing.
feral. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And they were really thrilled to see me. And
Mm,
we
sweet.
we sort of like you, oh my gosh,
Nice.
and just, yeah, reconnected, so.
Yeah, exactly. It's such an interesting way, and this is just the way that I read things. So it's just one perspective, but it's really interesting the way that our psyche can choose to depict such a complex dynamic like that
Yeah,
via just
yeah,
like one person's face, you know?
yeah, just a random, it could have been
Mhm.
probably many, many people, but it just
Mhm.
really
But
sunk
there's a
in when
little
I
bit of
saw that
meaning
person.
there that gives you
Yeah, yeah,
another layer. Yeah,
yeah, for
exactly.
sure. Yeah.
Yeah, like you said, their difficulty was a part of the context of the dream, but also you were watching them fully participate in this joyful moment at the same time.
Hmm.
Like
Hmm.
when we talk about grief, I feel like that so often is what the conversation boils down to is like, can I be in my grief or in my struggle or in my sorrow and also be in my joy and my, participation in life? And that's the balance, right? Like back to the Four of Pentacles. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. Right. Oh, this grieving is such a human experience. And what a joy, what a privilege to
I
be able to have
know.
this human experience, as
That's
hard
right.
as it is,
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
What a privilege. Yeah. And I think about that a lot when we have, part of the conversation you were saying about just like aging in general
Yes.
is to have that, it is a little bit of like a reframe, I would say, of like, what a privilege to be able to come into these different phases of my life and experience them, enjoy them,
Right. Yeah. And you think
hopefully.
about aging, women aging, right? And we greet our bodies with critique and judgment.
Right.
I think,
As if we were doing something wrong. Yeah.
yeah, as if something was bad,
Hmm.
or, like, I think it would be naive to say there isn't a little bit, as you're saying, of grief in that recognition. Like, oh, I'm not what I was.
Hmm.
Something is lost, my
Hmm.
youth, maybe, or, that
Hmm.
chapter of life. And what a joy to also simultaneously be in this exact moment. The
Yeah.
alternative is not aging or dying, right? So, like,
Exactly.
can I be present for this? Yeah.
That's right. Lovely. Okay. I know I love a dream that is like sort of simplistic like that. I don't know. So
Yeah.
many dreams. I think we
Mhm.
do get kind of lost in some of the plot points sometimes. And we forget that, like, when we can boil it down to sort of that core emotion, that's often where like the gold is for me. So that
Yeah.
I think that's
Yeah.
such a great example of like it can be a really simplistic dream that I can still take a lot from.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Definitely. That was my big takeaway. And again, kind of why it stuck out
Yeah.
is it wasn't some, winding epic journey.
Convoluted.
I have those sometimes, but those kinds of dreams sometimes,
Right.
but it just was very, very poignant, and I woke up
Yeah.
thinking about it, and the
Yeah.
the the atmosphere of the dream stuck with me.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I love it. Thank you so much for sharing, Sarah.
Yeah,
It's
thank you for
delightful.
asking.
On that note, we're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back. Okay, now I do not want to get too far into this conversation without talking a little bit about your work and your creative journey, Sarah.
Yeah.
So, I just, wherever you want to start, but I would love it if you would share a little bit with listeners about just kind of how you have incorporated this very important creative aspect of yourself, core self, capital S, into your sort of work, your lifestyle, your career.
Mhm.
So tell us about sort of what creativity means for you at this point and how you're living into that.
Yeah, maybe just to give a little bit of background. Before I became a therapist many moons ago, I was a full-time musician. I like made my way
Yes.
through college singing.
Yeah.
Maybe I was part of these
Which,
massive
like, who
bands
can
and
say
gigs,
that?
and
Yeah, I know.
it's like a random factoid about
I
me.
love it.
And my undergraduate major was in like vocal jazz performance,
Oh,
right? So
that's
I was
right.
like,
I forgot that. Okay, yes.
yeah, I was just singing and gigging from, place to place, and
Yeah.
that was really fun. So that I feel like that's just a kind of a core foundational piece of
For
who I
sure.
am. And then got into the therapy world. Just I started after college. I started volunteering, and really the people that I was meeting, experiences I was having after college, led me to pursue social work as a career. And I
Yeah.
really dove into that world, obviously, from there. And now, as you were saying, creativity is such a core component of who I am and who I am as a therapist. I
Yeah.
don't sing much anymore, but in the last handful of years, I've really gotten into pottery. I
Yes.
took some classes in college just as like electives and hadn't touched it for years and years. And
Yeah.
then I got gifted some pottery classes for my birthday a few years back, and I just like dove in head first. I just loved it, you know. So I have a little like side hustle where I like
Yeah.
schlep
I don't
my
know, Sarah. It
my
might be a little
wares.
more than a side hustle at this point. I'm just saying. I'm just
It's
saying.
just so magical. But I love that. Like I love kind of the both and of that. You know, I often am like in my head, my work with clients is just, of course, I'm sitting and we're in this one-to-one
Yeah.
conversation. It's so beautiful, but I'm then not as much in my body in that space. I mean,
Sure.
maybe some, but pottery is kind of the opposite of that, where I'm just fully engaged in this very physical practice, you
Yeah.
know, and my brain sort of goes offline. And it's just such a cool marriage of different types of work or different approaches to work. And I
Definitely.
think I think my work as a therapist makes me a better potter, and my work as a potter makes me a better therapist. And they just sort of like
Interesting.
have this beautiful interplay, you know. Yeah. I mean, I do have to say, I think being a therapist is inherently creative work
I
just
do
in
too.
and of itself, right? Like the building, the creating of a relationship that is inherently healing and
I know.
about getting to the core of issues and supporting one another. And um, yeah, just being with someone in a creative way. I mean, I think it's a defining piece of the work, I think.
Absolutely. I don't know if you feel this way, Sarah, or if you would categorize it this way, but like I have always viewed my work as a therapist as almost like a form of sort of parenting or like reparenting, like as a
Mhm.
process. And it's so interesting to me because I'm into astrology. And so in astrology, the fifth house, which is part of the, sort of overall birth chart system, the fifth
Yeah.
house is the house of both creativity and also sexuality and also
Mm.
parenting and co-creating and building. Right.
Mm.
So those things
Yeah.
all work in tandem. And so when I hear you talk about that, it makes me think of like fifth house energy, right?
Yes.
It all
Yes.
kind of comes back to the same good stuff.
I love that. Yeah. Yeah. Like creating that and like helping the clients to learn to reparent themselves, right? Like
It's a
it's this
scaffolding
building of
process,
a
right?
relationship
Yes.
here, but it's also
Yes.
the client doing that work inside as well. And
Yes.
that's inherently creative, I think. So,
Yes. It's this whole
yeah.
idea, I call it scaffolding, but I've heard it called many different terms. But it's like we build that safety between the two of us. That safety then transfers and carries over
Yes,
internally, right?
that's right.
And it's just so beautiful to watch that slowly unfold. And I say slowly because I'm a depth oriented clinician. I tend to work with clients long term. And I know that in many
Yeah.
cases you do too. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I think to your point of scaffolding, right? Like from an IFS lens, right? When
Yes.
someone doesn't have access to self in the moment, their parts are so big,
Hmm.
their inner child, for example, or their exiles, or,
Yes.
just so guarded. We get to stand in for self. We
That's
get to
right.
be self in that space
Hmm.
until they're healed enough or they have enough access to their own self.
Yes.
And a lot of times
Yes.
it's just sort of modeling, providing a safe space to land, showing them what it's like to be compassionate with
That's
themselves.
right. That's
you
right.
know,
When you really boil it down,
yeah,
this
yeah,
is what we're doing over and over and over again, right? We're
yeah,
reinforcing these feelings within the context of this relationship over and over again until all of a sudden they feel like they're coming naturally, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah. It's just part of how they relate to themselves then, right? They've
Yeah.
kind of rebalanced their system, and the parts that
Yes.
take up so much space can relax a little bit.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm glad you
Yeah.
framed it in terms of IFS because I know that that's sort of one of the key frameworks that you're using in your practice these
Mm,
days. And I know that listeners will love hearing about that because IFS is having a moment, as it should. It's
I
fantastic.
know. I know. It's really blowing up. It's very interesting.
Hmm.
And for whatever reason, it's gotten more popularity, but also like the research, I think is they're, they've been doing more and more research that shows the effectiveness of
Yes.
this approach and kind of
Well, in
how it
terms of
works and
sort
why
of,
it works. And
yes,
yeah.
I would imagine, I'm not as up on the research as you are, but I would imagine that a lot of it is also pointing to like the sort of long-term efficacy and
Oh,
effects
yeah.
of this type of
Yeah.
model. Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. I mean, it's effective for trauma, depression,
Hmm.
anxiety, and it
Hmm.
does it. The effects last, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. We're
So,
reworking, rewiring our internal system.
yeah.
Um, Okay, yes. Now, before we get too far away from the subject, so you shared with us that pottery is your medium right now, right?
Yes.
And I would
Yeah.
love it if you could share a little bit with listeners about the pottery that you create and sort of the style that you have found and get like just
Mhm.
share a little bit more if you would. In this
Mhm.
audio medium, help us draw a picture of what you're
Visualize,
creating. Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Exactly. Yeah, it's funny because pottery is it's very visual, and I think especially my style is very bright. So
Yes.
yeah, I I'm a I throw on the wheel, so
Yeah.
I'm not as much of a hand builder as I am a potter,
Yeah.
and I make functional work, and the designs are often like bright pops of color,
Yeah.
kind of rainbowy, or
Yes.
at least just a vibrant color against some exposed clay. And then typically I use like a base white glaze, if
Hmm.
you're familiar. And I do that very intentionally.
Yeah.
I think it's very representative of these designs are very representative of my own journey of again, kind of unleashing or uncapping that joy
Love it.
inside. And it's such a cool juxtaposition. I use this like brown kind of speckledy clay,
Yeah.
right? That's pretty earthy,
Yeah.
like our little bodies, right?
I
And then these
know.
like bursts of color, and it's just, yeah, I think they look so lovely.
Well,
So
and they come from this very, reflective representative place. Like you have found a
yeah,
way to reflect yourself, your process within this visual aesthetic that you created.
yeah,
And that
yeah.
is to me that's the crowning achievement of an artist. It's when
That's
we're really doing
so,
it.
thanks. It's been really fun. And it's hard to describe. Like it's hard
Of
if you
course.
want to see pictures, you can go to slowlifepottery.com.
We'll post pictures.
Yeah, it's meant to be this representation. I mean, not only my process, but the process I help clients to walk through,
That's
hopefully.
right.
And it's just such a fun expression. And it's my work is functional, right? Like it's very like user friendly.
Yeah.
It's meant to be interacted with
Yeah.
and played with, and it's pretty
Yes.
sturdy,
Yes.
like
Well, when you say
yeah,
functional, is what you mean that these are not like display pieces necessarily
right.
for like a shelf on a wall. Like we are using these pieces in our daily lives. We're using
Yeah.
these mugs and we're using these canisters. Yeah. Okay. I'm with you.
Yeah. It's a
Yes.
mug, it's a jar, it's a
Yeah.
plate, you're like eating your lunch on it. You're
That's right.
throwing your mug in your car and taking it to go. As
It's a
I
part of
often
my
do.
life. Yeah. It's not
Yeah,
just like a
it's
pretty
on
thing
the
to look
go.
at, although it is,
Yeah.
but yeah,
Yeah, it's both,
it's
right? Yeah,
both.
I think back to that, like that dynamic.
No, the
So,
more we get through this conversation, the more I get why this card showed up today, Four of Pentacles. Like
mm,
it's, yeah, very, very poignant in terms of
yes,
just that process. Yeah, the both and
right. Like holding it all, right? Holding the
holding it all.
juxtaposition, maybe. Yeah.
Yes. Okay, now, so we talked about your pottery. We talked about IFS, which I completely agree in what little context I have for that model. It's not the main model I use. I've like dabbled in IFS, but I would totally agree with you that it is a very creative and co-creative model to use.
Yeah.
So we talked about these aspects of your creativity. Are there other aspects of your creative self that you want to bring or discuss? There may be, there may not be.
It's a really good question. I mean, I think relationship is inherently creative as
Sure.
well.
Sure.
And I don't know, I like to think about my some primary core relationships, my spouse and friendships even as an ongoing creative
Sure.
dance, right? And I yeah, I don't know. I always like to just challenge myself to get curious about that, right? Like, what can we build? What are we,
I
as
love
we
that.
continue to relate to each other and grow with each other and change through these different phases of life? Like, what do we get to build between the two of us?
Mm,
And I mean, I think about that with my clients, but like in my personal life, with
absolutely.
people who matter most on the daily. So, yeah, it's just creativity really is infused kind of in all of it. And I also don't think that it's some, woo-woo thing that only certain people have access to. Like, I really
You just read
believe
my
that we're
mind. Yes,
all
Sarah.
inherently creative, right?
Yes. I was just going to ask you
Really,
about this. Yes.
whether you make beautiful spreadsheets or whether you make pottery, you know what I mean?
Does
Like,
not matter. Or you co
yeah,
create something in your relationship, or you co create something with your child, or you, right? Like,
right.
how are you tapping into that creative energy? Because I do think that a lot of listeners and just a lot of people in general would say, like, I have trouble accessing my creativity. I'm not sure how to tap into it. And so I'd be curious what you would say for those who feel like they have trouble or they feel like they don't have access maybe to that part or that sense of themselves. Just any
Yeah.
thoughts or advice you would give.
Yeah, I mean, I think this goes back to what we were talking about earlier around how we're reined in,
Yeah.
culturally, societally. And from an IFS perspective, we have parts that reiterate those messages internally, right? You're not
Yeah.
creative. You're too organized. You're too
Right. It's one
conservative.
box
You're
or another. And
too
that, yeah. Hmm.
yeah, what are people going to think,
Hmm.
or or whatever, these messages that we have going on the loop inside. Again, like back to the work of therapy sort of being inherently creative, I think helping some of those protector parts just kind of like loosen their grip a little bit, relax some,
Yeah.
can really reveal a ton of creativity maybe that was never available for folks,
Sure.
before. And yeah, and I think that shows up in a plethora of ways. I mean, and yeah, cooking, or community organizing, or yeah,
Yes.
your relationship with your kids, or
Yes.
your work environment, whatever that happens to be. There are endless canvases out there, right?
That's
Like,
right.
when you start to sort of unlock some of that stuff that holds you back, holds you
Hmm.
down,
Hmm.
the world becomes your canvas. And that is super
Beautiful.
exciting.
Absolutely, Sarah. Yes.
Mm.
Let the world become your canvas. What you're saying makes me think of part of my own process, which for the longest time was I know that I have creativity inside me. I know that I resonate with the idea of being an artist, but I don't know what my sort of medium for expression is. Maybe I should try this. Maybe I should try that. Maybe I should try
Mhm.
this. Maybe I should try that. And the whole time I am writing all the time because that's
Yeah,
like the thing
it's
that I
right there.
do.
Yeah.
It's literally the most natural
Uh-huh.
thing in the world that I do all the time. But for some reason, my parts or my protectors don't regard that as like legitimate artistry, right? It's not visceral enough or something. And so for the longest time, I felt like, I just got to find my medium. And then I woke up one day and I was like, wait a minute. I've been writing forever and this is my medium. And it doesn't mean that I won't play with other things, but also sometimes if we can just relax and let ourselves do the thing that feels the most natural, that becomes more of the doorway into the creative spirit, right? I'm just
Yeah.
following those breadcrumbs of what feels good to me. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Right. And gosh, it would be so fun. Like if we were to exchange sessions sometime, Jordan,
Yes.
like to
We've
work with
talked about that.
that
Yes.
protector, like yeah, what is that voice, when that voice is saying, what's your medium? And the writing
Yeah.
isn't whatever,
It doesn't
legitimate or
count.
whatever it
Yeah.
was.
Yeah.
Yeah, like where did that come from, right?
Hmm.
What is that part worried about? What
Exactly.
happens when that part, and I think you've seen, like just starts to open its hands a
Yeah.
little bit,
That's right. That's
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
Yes,
So,
I think that would be so fun. I would love to do something like that with
so fun.
you.
Yeah.
Yes. Even doing a little bit of work with a protector part like that, like just listening, right? We're listening to them, we're
Mhm.
listening to their perspective, we're helping understand maybe how they came to that perspective. There's this just releasing this opening that starts to
Yep.
happen, right? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And then, right, these things that are just very natural, like already
Yeah,
often part of your life, your routine,
that's
whatever,
right.
start to just blossom. You're
I
like, oh,
know.
that's how my creativity shows up, I
Yes.
have a little garden out front, like plant
Yes.
okra, like that's how my creativity shows up. Oh, right. Like these little things.
Hmm.
Yeah.
I'm expanding, broadening my definition of what this is and what
Mhm.
this can mean. Yeah, absolutely. Good.
Yeah.
I think that's so helpful. I hope that's helpful to listeners. It's helpful for me to hear that,
Yeah.
is that there are lots of ways to tap in. Now, we're coming to the end of our hour. I want to make sure that there are not other aspects of your work, your upcoming events, things that you want to talk about that you
Mhm.
have going on. So, anything else that you want to share with listeners about what is going on in your world, ways that they can engage with you, your work, please feel free to share. Tell us all the things, Sarah.
Yeah. I mean, maybe the only thing that we haven't touched on is like mindfulness and meditation practice, which are such a
Yes.
huge component of my practice and also my creativity, I think.
Yes.
And I'm sure you've, explored this in other episodes, and talked about, mindfulness, but that practice helps so much in working with my parts,
Yeah.
in accessing my creativity, in, centering, back to the Four of Pentacles
I
idea of like
know.
grounding and
Mhm.
recentering and kind of coming back to
Getting
the
into my
basics,
body. Yes.
getting into my body. Exactly. And that is really a core component of my personal daily practices and then my work with clients as well.
That makes sense.
So
We could call
yeah,
it like foundational, right? I mean,
yeah,
for me, I would say mindfulness is a foundational part of my own mental health practices. And I'm not being
yeah,
creative if I'm not feeling like I am in any sort of connected place, right?
yeah,
Like,
yeah.
yeah, mindfulness is part of how I get there.
Yeah, that's right. When my attention is, scattered to the winds
Yes.
and, all of the things, are swirling, it's much harder to access that stuff. So
Yes,
that's why we practice. We come back to the moment.
that's
So
right. What does that practice look like for you these days, just out of curiosity?
yeah, I have a pretty active sitting meditation that
Okay.
I active in that I do it often. I
Yeah.
sit for usually like 20 to 30 minutes a day. And I
Okay.
do just like I use Vipassana meditation or insight meditation. Yeah, I love it. It took me a bit to build up to that amount of time, but it's also,
So good to normalize that. Yes. Yes. Yes.
yeah, it's not going to be, it's just kind of like where I'm at in this moment. I don't think it has to be that way for everyone,
Yeah.
but I do try to have just that dedicated time to just check in, make sure I'm centering. That's the technique I use.
Man, this is like I guess this is just where my brain is, but when I hear you speak about what meditation does for you, which is like create this place to check in and just be present with yourself, your parts, whatever is showing up, to me, that also feels like part of this kind of parenting process that we're talking about, right?
Yes.
Like being the good internal parent. Like, I'm just going to sit here with you and you can be in any state that you need to be in. Like, this does not have to look a certain way right now, right? We're just
Yeah,
going to
that's right.
be with whatever is here in this just loving, accepting way. And what a
Yeah.
gift. Like,
Yeah, right. It's like you are showing care for yourself. You are
yes,
comforting yourself. You are being in it with
yes.
you, right? Like,
By just
um,
witnessing, right? I'm just,
yeah, exactly. Consoling yourself sometimes,
yes,
right? Like
yes.
cuddling yourself, all of those things that we
Truly,
need from parents. Yeah,
truly,
yeah.
truly. Ah,
It totally
beautiful.
speaks to that.
Yes. And it can be just a few minutes a day, right? Like if it's 20,
Yeah,
30, fantastic. If it's three, fantastic.
great. Exactly.
Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
Whatever works for you, you know?
Yes.
Yeah,
Just
yeah.
you can meet yourself wherever you are. But yeah, it's another tricky subject where I hear a lot of just like the creativity, I hear a lot of I can't meditate. I'm not a mindful
Yeah.
person. I can't
I
do
have
it.
ADD. I
Yeah,
can't
I
do
can't do
it.
it. Yep. My brain doesn't do
I
that.
have,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm neurodivergent. I can't do
Yeah.
it.
Yep.
Okay.
And the reminder is the point is that it's hard. Like,
Yeah, that's the practice. That's right.
that's the
There's
practice.
no doing it right.
It's
It's just
okay that it's
practice.
hard. Yeah.
Yeah,
I was
yeah,
trying to
it's
meditate
supposed
this
to
morning.
be.
I was just like all over the place mentally. I was like, okay, this is where we are
Yep.
today.
Noted. Yeah, can I be with
Noted.
me in this?
It doesn't
Yeah,
mean I'm doing it wrong.
right.
Yeah.
That's absolutely right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so helpful. Great. I'm glad you brought that up because it all goes together. Ugh, wonderful. Oh, Sarah, this is so fun. I don't want it to be
So
over.
lovely. I
I love
know.
it so
We could
much.
talk all day,
I
and we
know.
often do.
I'm so glad we finally made this happen. This was so lovely, as I knew it would
Oh,
be.
good.
Um,
Yeah.
okay, now, last but not least, please just share with listeners where to find you, follow along with your work. If they want to engage with you, how would they do that, Sarah?
Yeah. So I am licensed to practice in Missouri and Tennessee,
Mhm.
both. And I take clients from all over both states. So
Yeah.
you can find me on my website, Dr. Sarah Bollinger, DrSarahAHBOLLINGER.com. I think I have an opening or two. I'm
Good.
normally pretty full, but can figure it out. So that's the professional stuff, and then the pottery stuff. As I mentioned, I'm at slowlifepottery.com.
Yeah.
I post a good bit of that on Instagram. My handle's just Slow Life Pottery. So if you're interested in seeing the designs and stuff that we were talking about, it's a fun way to
Yes.
do it. And I'll have pop-up sales here and there, or online or in person here in Nashville
Yeah.
from time to time. So
I was going
fun
to
ways to connect.
exactly. I was going to
Yeah.
have you remind listeners that these are kind of every so often you'll do a drop or you'll do an event, but there's not
Yeah.
like an ongoing like shop, right? It's just these sort of events right now. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Full-time private practice and
Exactly.
and pottery is so time consuming. So I'll do small batches and then I'll have like a release of that at
That's
work at a
perfect.
certain time or whatever. So and
Yeah,
that sort of routine tends to work well for me given
absolutely.
my, other professional obligations. So
Exactly. And it's
yeah.
great because the people who love and are interested in your work want to stay tuned and stay
Yeah.
engaged, right?
Yeah. It keeps
Yeah,
people interested, right? Coming back
exactly.
for more.
Exactly. No, I think it's great. I think it's fantastic. I'm always like, when's the next drop? When am I getting a new piece of this wonderful pottery? I can't wait.
Yeah.
Usually I try and you're sold out already. Honestly, that's
I
usually what
had an
happens.
online shop, a shop drop, I think the end of July, just
Yeah.
a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
It sold out in about 20 minutes, which was like so fun.
20 minutes, Sarah.
I
Oh my God.
know. I think the next one will be early December. We're having like an open
Good.
studio art walk
Oh,
thing
fun.
in West Nashville. So you can stay tuned on the
Stay
Instagram
tuned.
account. And
That's right. Stay tuned. I'm sure I will be there. I would love to be there. Oh, so fun. Sarah, thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you for
Oh,
joining us. Thank you for
you're so
sharing your
welcome.
wisdom, your experience, your vulnerability. I knew that you would bring all of those different aspects, but I just thank you for being here and for doing this.
Oh, you're so welcome. And thank you, Jordan, for the opportunity and
So
just
fun.
the really brilliant questions and
Aw.
insights and ways to follow on these little funny trails that
These
we
are just
go
the
down. And
conversations I love
it's so great.
having. Like
Me
I want to have
too.
these conversations with my friends and people that I meet. So I'm like, cool. I create a context where I get to do this for an hour. Great. Love it.
It's so life-giving. Yeah. I mean, and yeah, talk about a creative outlet, this podcast, right? Like
Yes.
what you're creating with this is so beautiful. And I think
Thank you.
your listeners feel that in a palpable way.
Thank
So
you. Thank
I
you. I
certainly
hope
have.
so. I'm having fun doing it, right? Regardless. So I that's as long as that is the case, I'm going to keep doing it. That's my
Yay.
plan.
So
Okay, well, Sarah, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And yes, listeners, please just follow along with Sarah. You will not be sorry that you did. But I hope you have a beautiful rest of your day, darling. I'll see you soon.
Wow, sounds good.
Thank you. Mwah. That's a wrap for this episode. Thank you again to my guest, Sarah Bollinger. May your prismatic magic continue to shine through each and every one of your life-giving endeavors. We'll see you back here next month with another amazing guest. If you want more Psyche Magic, be sure to check out the Psyche Magic Salon on Substack. There you'll find all full and bonus episode archives for the podcast, as well as my weekly written newsletter with magical musings and recommendations for sources of creative inspiration. You'll also find the recorded version of our salon ritual to invoke creative flow. That's psychemagic.substack.com. If you haven't already, please take a moment now to subscribe, rate, and review us on your podcast app of choice. It really makes a difference and helps other people find the show. We hope you'll also follow along with our shenanigans on Instagram and TikTok at Psyche Magic Podcast. Psyche Magic was produced and recorded by me, Jordan Hale. Editing for this episode is by Masuzu Inaga. Our theme music is by Young Summer. Artwork is by Annika Murphy. Special thanks go to Daniel Higbee, Grace Fuse, and Michael McMillan. Thank you so much for listening. I'll leave you with a question. If you must sleep through a third of your life, are you willing to sleep through your dreams too? Get your dream journals out, y'all. Until next time.